Hey everyone, Ashley Mailloux here with the Daily Racing Form. This Saturday, June 10th, all eyes will be on Belmont Park, Belmont Stakes Day. It's going to be the 12th race on their program, that traditional distance of 1.5 miles on the main track, and we'll take a look at the field top to bottom. It's a really big field of 9. Some interesting horses in here. You see the return of Tapit Trice, as well as Angel of Empire. We saw both of them in the Derby, National Treasure, the Preakness winner, and let's not forget about Forte, who we haven't seen, was set to be the Kentucky Derby morning line favorite, but was scratched before the race, did not race in the Preakness, and now is going to return off a considerable layoff. We haven't seen him since the Grade 1 Florida Derby. So, as I mentioned, 9 in here. It's been interesting to see all the hype on Twitter and social media and whose people are picking it and why. So it's going to be an interesting rendition of the race, but we'll dive into it here with the number 1, Tapit Shoes. This one trained by Brad Cox, was most recently second in the Bathhouse Row at Oakland Park after having that 2-month freshening. Raced very well, was forwardly placed in there, but just could not hold off Red Route 1 in that event, missed by a head, and it was a step up. It was his first time in stakes competition. He's certainly going to have to move forward. And another thing, he's going to have to stretch out from 1.1 miles to 1.5 miles, and a lot of these horses obviously are stretching out considerably in distance. With the Derby, at least you have the 1.25 mile race under your belt, but this one is going to have to stretch out. And I thought he raced really well. Draws the inside in here. It'll be interesting to see the tactics because typically he has been forwardly placed in his 2-turn races thus far in his career. The number 2, Tapit Trice, another son of Tapit here. This one trained by Todd Pletcher, and he's been an interesting horse to watch. Now, he finished 7th in the Derby, but let's go back to the Bluegrass Stakes to Keeneland back on April 8th. We're going to look at 2 parts of the race here. He's on the rail here, the number 1. You see the Whisper Hill Farm Silks, and he is just always never in a hurry. He's always really slow out of the gate. We saw that. You can see Louis Size was calling upon him, and he's a grinder. He's a horse that he looks like he needs to be called upon, but once he's, kind of figures it out here in the stretch, he's going to have a really nice stretch battle between him and Verifying. He is going to get the job done by a neck. It's been something that's been talked about, that he seems to not have it all quite figured out, which makes us think that maybe we haven't seen his best yet. He is going to go to 1.5 miles, and looking at his running style, it seems like he's a horse that's going to thrive with more distance. And in terms of the Derby, he had some trouble in the Derby, certainly, had it kind of against him in there. I still think he raced okay with it all being said and done. But I do think in terms of the break, even though he's going 1.5 miles, the way this race traditionally sets up, he needs to be in a good spot. I'm not saying he has to be really forwardly placed, but he doesn't want to spot the pace setters here too much distance, because traditionally those really far back types, they don't fare too well in here. And luckily for him, we've seen in his races that he typically does have a couple horses beaten early on. That wasn't the case at the Tampa Bay Derby, but he ended up being much the best in that race. So he's one that I think is still an improving type, and we haven't seen his best yet. The number 3, Archangelo, this one, for Jenna Antonucci. This has been an interesting horse to watch. Had those 2 starts at Belmont in December and January. Then in March was able to put it all together and break the maiden. And then to see that next performance, we'll take a look at that in the Grade 3 Peter Pan right at Belmont Park. You can see him here on the outside. He's the number 1. He took some respect in here, was 5-2. He's going to have to really throw it down here in the stretch between him and Bishop's Bay. Bishop's Bay was favored in this race, is on the inside, but this horse, Archangelo, is just not going to let anyone really pass him. He's passed there, but in the end, he was so gritty in this performance and ends up getting the job done. Javier Castellano's been aboard him in his last 2 efforts, going to stick with him. He's an intriguing horse. He's going to have to now stretch out once again, but it was really nice to see him have that ability to battle back so strongly in the stretch at Belmont. The number 4, National Treasure. This is the Preakness winner. Looking at the Preakness, we'll take a look at the replay and just talking about the Preakness in general. This is a horse that had always shown that kind of early speed, had blinkers put back on. You can see him. He was the number 1 in here. And Johnny B was able to get him to the front and set very reasonable fractions. I also don't think the Preakness field was that stellar this year. But I will say Blazing Sevens did put the pressure on him here. This is a true stretch battle between these 2, and National Treasure was able to grind it out. So that was going 1 mile and 3/16. Obviously now has to stretch out to 1.5 miles. I do think looking at this field, he could have some pace pressure in here, and he's just going to have to go further than he did. And I think this group, there's a little bit more depth to this field than there was in the Preakness. So I do think he's going to have his work cut out for him. I don't think things are going to be as easy as they were, at least in the early stages of the Preakness. The number 5, Il Macarallo, this one out of the Antonio Sano barn, was able to pick it up last time out and get that second lifetime win. You can see there was a big gap between his maiden score and that second lifetime win. He was in all different spots. You can see he participated in all 4 of the prep races down at Gulfstream Park, and kind of that progression to get to the Florida Derby, that being the Mucho Macho Man, the Holy Bull, and the Fountain of Youth. And he didn't fare well in any of them, but he got back at that mile distance back on May 11th and got a confidence boosting score. And the big thing is, notice the difference. I mean, when he's been on the front end, he's been very tough, but that has been at the 1-turn mile. And it starts in between those 2 wins. He was just never forwardly placed, and they put the blinkers on him last time out. He also got Lasix, which he will not have. None of these horses will have in the Belmont. So he's certainly going to be an outsider in here. But if you look at him, you wonder if he could be part of the pace presence in here. I don't know. He's gone fast in those 1-turn miles, but at the same time, it's hard to kind of rattle off those sorts of fractions going a mile and a half. So I'll be curious to see what the strategy is in this race. The number 6, Forte, as I alluded to earlier, we were looking at the Derby favorite, and he was scratched in the days before the race. And we'll take a look at his most recent effort. You do have to go back to April to find it, but it was the Grade 1 Florida Derby. And this is a horse that I think in some of his races we're just always waiting for when he's going to arrive on the scene. He's just such an honest horse here in the lane. Mage, the Kentucky Derby winner, eventual Kentucky Derby winner, has the lead here, but Forte is just going to grind it out. It's his best strides late in the stretch here, going a mile and an eighth, and is able to get the job done. And he does it pretty effortless. It takes him a while to get rolling, but a little different. If you watch him and kind of compare him to, say, Tapit Trice, Luis Saez has had kind of chase after Tapit Trice, where I think in here, when you look at Forte, Ira Ortiz Jr. has to shake him up a little bit, and once he gets going, he makes it look pretty effortless. But as I've mentioned, we haven't seen him since that race. A lot of these other horses have that race day fitness. He has had a bullet drill, though, in preparation for the Belmont back on June 3rd. Price will be short. It's interesting what you make out of him just with that layoff. And just, it's been tough to beat him so far. You look at his record, he is 6 for 7 in his career. So I can see people going either way here with Forte, the number 7 Hit Show. It's been sort of the wise guy horse, or at least from what I've seen. He raced pretty well in the Derby. He ended up being 5th there. Prior to that, though, he was 2nd in the Wood Memorial, and we saw the throwdown between him and Lord Miles at Aqueduct, going a mile and an eighth. He's been very game, and I think from a perspective of his race, his running style, I think he's interesting. I think he should be pretty close to the pace just off of it, and might be kind of in a good spot in the stretch to make that late bid. He's been able to do that in the past, and I think that's why a lot of people may be gravitating towards him, and he just seems like he's a horse that's an improving type as well. Number 8, Angel of Empire, another one trained by Brad Cox, was 3rd in the Derby. He was shuffled back pretty far early on, only had a handful of horses beaten, and did make a really nice late run. Ended up going off favorite, slightly favored in the Derby, but prior to that, had that nice 2-win streak down at Fairgrounds and then Oaklawn Park in the Arkansas Derby. And he just looked visually impressive in both of them, but really in the Arkansas Derby, I still think with everything kind of said and done, I was impressed by his Kentucky Derby run. He's going to get blinkers on, and I wonder if part of that strategy is just having him a little bit more keen early on. Not saying he's going to be on the front, but to have him focused and be a little bit more in touch with the fields, because when you look at the Derby and some of his other races, he has been pretty far back. The number 9, Red Route 1, will wrap up the field here. This one trained by Steve Asmussen, was 4th in the Preakness. Looking at his trip, I think he was a little closer than we had seen him before, but it was a compact field, and I think Joel Rosario had to make that decision so that he would be in a good striking position. And also knowing that early on, National Treasure, everyone saw it, he was really going pretty easy on the front end, and I think in terms of a rider planning their ride from there, if you feel things are slow early on, you have to put your horse in a good spot. Prior to that, though, this one was able to win the Bathhouse Row over Tapit Shoes, who draws the rail in here. My concern with him, though, is I think in terms of numbers and just his style, he's at a disadvantage in here. I think there's some other horses that have better recent form and have showed up a little bit more in their last couple efforts. So that's the field of 9 here for this year's edition of the Belmont Stakes. And it was torn between a couple of horses. It's tough to say what to do here. I think there's really the 4 horses that I picked here are the ones that stood out to me. And I'm going to go back with Angel of Empire, the number 8. This was my Kentucky Derby pick. I thought he ran well in the Derby. I'm hoping the equipment change at least puts him a little closer to things early on, and he's shown the ability to pass horses and do it quite easily. So I like him in this spot. He's 7-2 on the morning line. The number 2, Tapit Trice, I've said it, I think we haven't seen his best yet. I think Luis Saez is going to have to play the break very well, and it's going to have to get him out of the gate. Kind of what happened in the Bluegrass at a mile and eighth. We saw that break out of the gate. he just needs to really be asked. He's never in a hurry, and I would hate to see him kind of at the back of the pack early on in this race, just with the potential pace set up in here and the trip that he could get. So I'm hoping that he does get a good position in here, and he's going to have to improve off his Derby performance. The 6 Forte, he's hard to knock. My only concern with him is it's been a while since we've seen him at the races, and I think other horses have a little bit of a freshness edge. But look at what he's done so far in his career. He really is hard to knock. And then I rounded out with the number 7 Hit Show. I think he's sneaky in here. Now he's 10-1 on the morning line. A lot of people are gravitating towards him, and I understand why. I think a lot has to do, he is on the improve. He's getting a little bit better with each race. He ran a really good race in the Derby. And, you know, looking at him, I think in terms of trip, he should be just off of it. He could be in striking position early on, which could make him sneak in here. But I do think he's going to take respect in this spot. But for me, I'm going to give Angel of Empire one more try in these Triple Crown races, and hopefully he can win the Belmont on Saturday. Good luck.